Hey guys, today I interview Bob Terwilliger, and Bob was really my competition for over a decade of guiding and outfitting. He worked for several of the neighboring outfitters at a high level, really as a head guide position. This guy has spent a ton of time hunting elk on public land in wilderness areas, backpack hunts, horse and mule based hunts, stuff in areas where the tags were easy to draw and the elk were heavily pressured and really hard to kill. So we dive into a bunch of tips and tricks on that front. The other thing about Bob is that he's an older guy. He actually started guiding elk in his late 40s and his 50s, and he's continued for the last 20 years being able to do that. So we touch on physical fitness. He has some tips for guys that are out of shape and older guys, how you can get into the elk hunting game and continue to do it on the physical front. So without further ado, let's dive right in. All right, guys, so I wanted to mention that I'm having these custom skinning knives made. These are called Cliff Skinner. I've got a whole bunch of reasons why I've had this knife made the way that it's made. Got a short video on the website. The details are there. pursuitwithcliff.com. Click in the corner up by shop, you'll see Cliff Skinner. Click that puppy, you'll get all the details. All right, Bob, super excited to have you on. I feel like me and you have a history that we don't know each other all that well, but we've always been neighbors. You know what I mean?
Yes, we have.
You've always been, you were over at Budge's, you were over at Winterhawk, and time flies, man. We've been neighbors for a very long time. And now I'm no longer your neighbor where you're guiding and outfitting and having your adventures, but finally I get a chance to sit down and talk to you, man. And just so the viewers know, you've been hunting elk and fly fishing and packing in an area that I know well, but you've spent even more time there than I have. And to me, Bob, it is the stereotypical over-the-counter wilderness elk hunting area. And I think that the stuff that you know and what you've experienced over the years there could apply to so many other wilderness areas in Colorado or other areas too. Just areas where elk get, I mean, for lack of better words, they get the shit hunted out of them, right?
Yes, they do.
So I think you probably have so much knowledge on that you don't even realize it, man. So that's what I want to dive into in this podcast. I think it'd be super interesting to all the guys that watch my YouTube channel and listen. So thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here and glad to finally get to talk. You know, we've talked a lot about getting together over the years, and for one reason or another, just both of us being busy or other commitments, it hasn't worked out. But I'm excited to do this. So
Yeah, for sure. Bob, do you mind letting the listeners know just your history in the flat
sure,
tops and hunting in Colorado?
sure. So I'll start out. You know, I actually grew up in Western New York State in the heart of the Catskill Mountains. My grandfather had a big ranch up there. He had a couple horses. So from the time I was a really little guy, I followed him and my dad around hunting whitetails. Learned to call wild turkeys using a diaphragm at a young age, so it made picking up the diaphragm call for elk pretty easy. And I actually moved to Colorado 30 years ago, or over 30 years ago, I should say, for work. I worked for IBM prior to when I got into guiding. But the first 14 years I lived here in Colorado, I lived, to hunt elk. That's something that was in my dream from the time I was a young kid, and I read about it in Outdoor Life, Field and Stream. So when I was moved here, I was gung ho, and I learned kind of through the school of hard knocks. Although I did kill elk most every year, the first 14 years before I started guiding. And one of the things that really enabled me to do that was spending so much time in the country that I was hunting in, not only during the hunting season, but also in the non-hunting periods in the summer. Going up there and learning country, looking for elk, glassing for elk. Those kinds of things really paid dividends in building the base, of course. And then back in 2008 is when I first started getting involved in doing some guiding in the flat tops. It didn't take me long to see that was an opportunity for me to get out of corporate America at a young age, which I was able to do. And this will actually be my 16th year guiding elk hunts and backcountry fly fishing on horseback and mules. So
Sure. I'm gonna dive into this more with you, Bob, because I'm very
sure.
intrigued by it. You started guiding at what age?
I was 50 51, I believe. No,
Yeah.
52. I just turned 52.
Which
So
which dude is stunning to me because I'll be totally honest with you, Bob. To this day, the type of guiding you're talking about, it's the way I would describe it. It's my most favorite type of hunt to guide, and it's my least favorite type of hunt that I like to guide at the same time because it's so hard. I mean, the horseback deal, just the density of elk. It's hard physically, mentally. To think of starting at 50 is really intriguing to me. So let's just get that out of the, get that, talk about that right off the bat, Bob. Do you have any insight in, I guess what has helped you keep it up and start at an early age in terms of elk hunting? Or I
well,
mean, you know,
first of all, to do this stuff in hunt elk, and you understand this well, Cliff. And a lot of people think they want to elk hunt until they go the first time. The fire's got to burn in your belly because it's a tough hunt. I don't care
sure,
where you hunt. It's a tough hunt. It's a physical test. And probably the one thing that I was blessed with, besides having some good upbringing, with hunting fundamentals and ethics and all those kinds of things and building skills, was that I played sports my whole life into my early 30s. I played in college and high school. I played 3 sports in high school, 2 in college, and a lot of competitive fast pitch softball and basketball after college. So I got into working out really in my mid to late 20s as a means to start weaning myself off competitive sports. And of course, that paid dividends with the elk hunting about keeping myself in shape year round. The other thing that I would say is important, it's important for all of us, even for me now, is that I've always felt like I was a sponge, that I was looking to soak in skills from everybody I met. And sometimes there were folks that were older than me, and sometimes there were even people that had less experience than me, but they knew a different way of doing things.
sure,
So that has helped me a lot. I never was too proud to learn from somebody else. And when I first got into the business, of course, where very well, working at Winterhawk,
yeah,
you know, um, I was blessed to get some really good teaching there and learn some of the basics. And from a guy, from a guy like Larry, that he wasn't, if you had uh, soft skin, or had your feathers ruffled easy, he probably wasn't going to be your guy. But I
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
took that as a challenge. I mean, like you mentioned on the horse stuff. When I was first learning and working there, he used to amaze me because he would come out at 4 o'clock in the morning after we had all the stock saddled, and he'd stand out and he'd look down the row at the stock, and he would see if a breast collar was wrong. He'd see if the rear cinch was too loose. He would look at all those things, and he'd come out and pick on those things. And he knew I was a responsible guy, so he kind of went after me in the beginning. Um, and when he would see those things, I get flustered to myself, and I would try that much harder to really make sure and to pay attention to details, because those things are really important when you're taking inexperienced people out, especially riding in the dark and riding in the country that we rode in the flat tops.
right, sure. I mean, it's also just interesting to me, Bob, because, and I think this relates to a lot of, because a lot of my audience is guys getting into elk hunting, not necessarily guiding, but they're getting
Right.
into doing their first elk hunts. They're 35, they're 45. I think, I, I think it's obviously something you've done. You went into this whole deal almost reinventing yourself. And I think people go through that same process, just taking on elk hunting. But it's hard. It's hard for grown men to do that, I think.
It is hard. It's hard to break old habits too. I mean,
Yeah.
most guys that want to elk hunt, most of them are whitetail hunters.
Yeah.
And you know yourself that, I mean, there's some similarities, but it's a whole different style of hunting versus getting up in your stand in the dark and perhaps not getting down until it's dark.
Sure.
We're not doing that during elk hunting. I mean, we're on the move a lot more. We're using our glasses, to save miles on our feet. The calling aspect, just all that, and then the physical test of the Rockies. I mean, there's a lot of places, of course, where you can hunt whitetails where it's rough country, but you're not hunting at 10,000 feet and up, for example, like in archery season or even first rifle. So
Right. Yeah. And taking in account what you just said, what is a lot of people's background plus your experience getting into this and building up the experience and learning from folks. Do you have a few things, Bob, that you think you wish somebody would have told you in the beginning that are not now are very clear to you? That a guy that's 45 is going to go on his first elk hunt. Is there any like what's the low hanging fruit?
The low hanging fruit, of course, first is get yourself in the best shape possible. And not everybody knows how to do that. So don't be too proud to go, maybe you go to a gym or whatever, you got a buddy and get some help with training, get a little bit of help with your diet if you need to. A lot of times, as time goes on, one of our worst enemies in life can be alcohol. I mean, I've always been, pretty blessed that I haven't, I enjoy a drink or two, but never over the top. But that can be an area where, particularly as you age, that gets you out of shape quicker than anything. And then the other things that I would say is, YouTube can be a really good resource to learn from, both for calling. I mean, I still watch YouTube all the time to learn different variations and cadences to my calling ability. If you're talking about archery, watching some of these guys, what they do when they get into a setup, when you're calling elk, the first thing these guys are doing, they're assessing their shooting lanes. They're taking a range on different distances before the elk gets there. You're thinking about, depending on the direction that elk is coming from, where might be my opportunity to draw. Those kinds of mentally preparing yourself can pay huge dividends, and you can practice those in your mind and thinking about it. And watching YouTube can be a great way. And then the other thing, probably one of the biggest things, is shooting practice. I don't care if it's archery or rifle. A lot of guys get, the typical rifle hunter, for example, they go out to the rifle range maybe a few times a year, some maybe once or twice. They zero their rifle off sandbags or off some kind of bench rest, and they never really practice, real shooting positions. And you're not sitting in a tree stand. You're on the move with elk hunting. It's going to be situations where you need to be able to pull up to a tree and lean over a limb. Maybe you lay your backpack down and shoot prone or over a log. If you're sitting, getting yourself a good solid base. But practicing real hunting situations with your shooting is huge, and knowing your weapon. And bow, I'll say the same thing. You're not in a tree stand where your backpack's off and you take your quiver off your bow and hang it in the tree and you're shooting just your bow. You've got your backpack on many times. You've got your binos
Sure.
on the front. You've got your clothing and whatever, and you got to be able to pull up and shoot fairly quickly with your quiver on. Those are things that I didn't really realize when I first started, and those can pay dividends in terms of getting yourself mentally and physically prepared to go on one of these hunts.
Yeah, man, I very much agree with that, Bob, and I'm gonna dig in a little bit further because I'm just curious, and I don't expect you to know like exact answers, but I'm just curious your gut feel when you were over the years of guiding rifle hunters. What were the most common shooting positions that you saw people shoot from? And also,
Um,
what rest were they using? And the reason I ask is because I think it sounds so dorky, Bob, but I think this is something that's highly overlooked, particularly for newer guys. They don't realize how important being prepared for the actual way they're going to shoot is.
yeah, I mean, probably the most common way is sitting back up against a tree or sitting on the side of a hill and putting your backpack in front of you. Of
Yeah,
course, if it's a longer shot, having somebody, even if you get your buddy to sit behind you back to back, so you got something steady to lean back against. But
yep,
shooting is, sitting is probably number one. I would say, prone would be number two. And then, I like to still hunt a lot. So I practice a lot leaning in against a tree and
sure.
pulling my rifle right up in against a tree where I can get really rock steady and just practicing that and getting confidence with it.
Yeah, yeah. The seated position from my perspective is it's for sure the number one, way that I shoot from. And then also the number one way that I struggled with, like the number one position where clients needed to shoot that way because they needed some level of angle control in the mountains. If you're prone a
Right.
lot, you can't go up, you can't go, you can't get that angle up, can't get that angle down. It's hard to move a little bit. There's vegetation or whatever. They needed to sit and shoot, from that I don't know, I'd say 20 inches off the ground. Their rifle would be parallel at that level, but
Right,
they weren't comfortable doing it because they hadn't done it. Um,
right.
I think that's a huge one, man. And then the other thing is, like you say, with archery, guys literally just being able to like without letting their bow down, being able to pit like you can't shoot perfect form. You're not going to be able to move your feet
Oh,
sometimes. You're going to have to rotate your torso and shoot it most times.
or lean out from behind a
Yeah.
tree.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. What
absolutely.
why
You
do you
know,
think guys don't practice it? It's
I,
kind of
I
an enigma.
I think it's. I mean, a lot of guys. There are guys now, and my son is a big advocate of this. That go to these 3D ranges, and they're
Yeah.
great.
Yep.
Um, they're great because that teaches you about shooting uphill and downhill and how you might have to compensate a little bit, and also thinking about exit, entry point and exit point in terms
Sure.
of where you want that your weapon or bullet or arrow to go through that animal. But then the other one that I see a lot too, where guys can hesitate and blow the opportunity because Cliff, they don't. I mean, they don't give you much of an opportunity. They're
Right.
there and gone.
Yep.
And really getting mentally prepared to shoot through tight windows. Now, I was
Yep.
blessed with that in the Catskills, um, because in those dense forests, you're shooting tight windows, and you're not shooting super long shots. But I've made in the Catskills, I've made 100, 150-yard shots through the timber, by picking a window, where that animal is going and getting the rifle up and getting good and steady. And when he picks in, it's like when he steps into the scope, it's like I take his picture. Same thing with bow, picking a spot. But a lot of guys can have trouble with tight windows too. So that's another area, particularly with archery. That's really easy to do.
Yeah.
You bring a small target with you and you go out and or you shoot stumps or whatever and get out, do some walking wherever you live and try to shoot through some of those small openings, and learn how to do that because those are going to pay dividends in terms of cashing in and getting your elk.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, it's an interesting one. I totally agree in like with the archery one, just shoot and then also rifle shooting realistic positions. I tend to think, Bob, that it's partly like cultural, cultural social. We don't want to be the guy at the range who's got all of our, who's not on the bench. He's got all of his shit out. He's trying to, shoot the different positions. You're kind of like look weird, like what's the guy doing? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? So any of those practical ways of doing it, like you said, 3D stuff, that's pretty darn realistic, right? You're going to be able to
yeah,
do that. That's great practice. It comes down to you know some of the best clients I had from a marksmanship standpoint, both archery and rifle, were just I would just describe them as good old boys, and they grew up shooting squirrels. They grew up walking through the woods, and with their archery equipment and shooting at stumps, shooting at grouse, all of that. And to some extent, I think that's lost. It's a little bit lost now. A lot of guys, particularly with compounds. I mean, I shoot both traditional and compound, but guys don't want to shoot at anything. They don't want to. They don't want to shoot at a stump. They don't want to shoot at a grouse. They don't want to get it. You almost kind of have to. You got to get some reps, you
yeah.
know?
You really do. I mean, we've even done some fun stuff when I'm on hunting for myself, and my son or son-in-law, whatever, friends. That I'll bring my little 177 caliber air rifle into
Sure.
camp, and a few days before the elk season, we have an offhand competition. Not, a lot of guys
Yeah.
don't have the skill to shoot offhand at an elk, and they shouldn't if they don't. But it's still it all builds confidence up here, and enables you to get that rifle steady, So it's little games you can do with that, and it doesn't even have to be your hunting rifle, It can be a 22 mag, 223
Sure.
air rifles. There's lots of fun stuff to shoot.
Yeah, yeah. Have you shot any of these new PCP air rifles?
No, no, I
Oh,
have not.
dude. So I spend I live part of the year now in the Caribbean, and they're real common there just because gun
Okay,
regulations. And dude, they're like a 22, Bob. They're crazy powerful. What it is a high. It stands for pre-charged something, right? But they basically have a mini scuba tank on them, and
okay.
it's pressured to like 4,000 psi. So that thing, I mean it's like a real gun pretty much. But I got into them down there, but they are a great way for a guy to get reps. If he's particularly if he's in an environment where he can't, a lot of guys can't. They can't. There's no way that they can shoot a firearm that often just because of the noise or whatever. But
Right.
those things are pretty cool. Just
Yep.
it's like the little things, man. It's like target acquisition, just getting your sight picture with your, the right, just looking through the scope. That stuff you gotta do it a bunch of times to
You
be
do.
to be handy about it. And you sparked a question, Bob, and I haven't talked about it with many people, and I personally don't do a whole lot of it elk hunting, but you talked about still hunting. You mind breaking that down? How that's been effective for you?
Yeah, I mean, certainly like in the morning, let's say that, what I'm doing is I try to, and this is probably another thing I learned from whitetail hunting. I used to, hoof it up to the top of the mountain and, in the morning, and I would kind of hunt my way up, but I'd try to get up there fairly quick, before the wind changed, and then, hunt benches, down. And what I learned with elk hunting pretty quick is that I don't need to get to the top. I want to get underneath that stuff at tree line where I can glass and listen and hear in those big mountain bowls. And so, typically what I'll do is I'll try to get into an area where I know that the elk are generally feeding and I can hopefully catch them at first light or hear them talking. I'll get to those places and, if I don't hear anything, I might let out a location bugle. Um, and then, let's say I don't hear anything from that, I'm glassing a little bit, then I'll take off. I've got a direction I'm going, but I'm staying down where I typically can see up, where I can see up above me and glass and use my binoculars a lot. And what I'll do is, in those situations, I'll try to pick up elk, moving, and then once I see them, then I'm going to try to figure out how am I going to get near to them to cut them off and get a shot, or potentially try to call to them, using the terrain, keeping in mind the wind, so that I can get there without them seeing me or smelling me. So that's kind of the way that I like to move if I'm hunting archery, sometimes even first rifle. In those situations, of course, I'm going along and I'm calling periodically, trying to get stuff to answer me. Depending on how many hunters in the area, um, I don't tend to call real loud because these elk that are pressured today, they're not. You can catch them on days where they're screaming their bloody head off, but that's not the norm. A lot of times, you hear these high pitched whistles, and if you're not close enough, you may not even hear it. But I'm not screaming my head off either for two reasons. Number one, it's not natural in the environment we have today, unless I get a bull that's really worked up that I'm working. And number two, I don't want to call a bunch of hunters to me either.
Yeah, sure.
So, but that's kind of what I mean by still hunting. If I got snow that is quiet to walk in, that's another way I like to go, where I can kind of pick a line, keeping the wind in my favor, where I can see, because the elk really stand out when they're in that snow, and then figuring out how I'm going to get close to them, either through calling or on foot to cut them off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had fairly good luck tracking elk in those conditions, in the flat tops.
Yep,
In
absolutely.
just you get the right type of snow conditions where you could be quiet, but you also got smoking fresh tracks or whatever. And
Right.
I found that a few times that once the plateau gets just a ton of snow on it, and it seems like all the elk have left, but you catch a bull or two up there on the top, and you can make it happen. A lot of times, I hate to even admit this, Bob, but I'll do a lot of the tracking on horseback. You know what I
Yep,
mean?
that works too.
Literally following the tracks. And, I'm cognizant looking ahead, but I don't know if you've noticed this, but they're not near as afraid of horses as they are people
No,
walking,
you can get away. You can get away with a lot. In
Yeah.
fact, I'll tell you just a funny story that had a
Yeah,
little
go
bit
for
of
it, man.
humor to our discussion. So I was guiding a guy. This is when I was working at Winterhawk, and this was third rifle season. And we're riding up, just inside the edge of the timber, um, in we're going up this high mountain bowl, and I spotted this bull elk just breaking out of the timber, really nice 6 point, and I got him down off his horse and everything, and it's like you said, we're riding along, and the bull kind of glanced at us, but
Sure.
he didn't really spook. He went right out across this big high mountain park. I got my guy down, and I said, get yourself slide up there to that bench and get yourself comfortable and shoot him. And he gets up there, and the bull is about halfway across, and I'm saying, why doesn't he shoot? Well, Cliff, he went to put 6 bullets in his gun before he ever thought about shooting. And by the time he got the gun up and got steady, the bull was already in the timber.
Oh,
And
geez.
I didn't say a word. And
Yeah.
that night at dinner, he looked at me, he says, Bob, he says, I got to tell you something. He said, I'm sick. I said, well, why is that? He says, I don't know why I just didn't put 1 bullet in the gun and shoot that. I said, you know what? I said, I was thinking the same darn thing, but I did not want to break your heart.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
He wanted to be fully loaded.
he wanted to be
Yeah.
fully loaded, and all he needed was one because the bull was probably 200 yards from him.
Yeah, yeah, just a
Crazy.
little brain fart happens to the
Right.
best of
Yeah.
us, but yeah, yeah, no, for sure. It is amazing how they're a little. It's kind of like driving by them. You can drive by elk, but the minute you stop,
Yeah.
they're like out of there. That's for sure the
Absolutely.
case. But I know, and I've got a question here from. So I actually have a little. If the viewers don't know, I have a little. It used to be a Patreon group, but I moved it, so a little kind of private membership group where I just try to help guys out. And I've got, I think, 70 or 80 guys on there, like tons of great questions. They're the exact guy we're talking about, Bob. Like 30 to 50 years old for the most part. Um, just looking to get into elk hunting. And one of the most common questions they ask, because a lot of them are jumping into it via archery, which, well, I'm actually going to ask you that first because I think it's one of the hardest. It's unfortunately why, like a lot of people are motivated to start that way, but I wish they would start rifle hunting. Do you have an
Yeah.
opinion on that before I get into the question?
Yeah. I mean, I tend to agree with you on that because
Yeah,
archery is just that much tougher. I mean, with the rifle, obviously you don't have to get as close. Um, and with when you're seeing an elk for the first time, particularly a bull, it's really exciting. That's why we do it. I
yeah,
mean, I
sure.
still get excited to this day, and it just kind of takes the edge off to go kill one with the rifle first. So I'd agree with you there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, and I think it just comes down to I hope that people don't get too discouraged and quit. You know,
Right.
and I feel like archery is when it's hard. I mean, it's really
Yep.
hard. Anybody that says otherwise, and the type of hunting we're talking about, it's pretty tough. But
Yep.
we'll talk. We'll dive into it anyways because I'm interested, and I'm sure a lot of people are interested too. What's your general calling strategy, Bob? Well, so I'm going to frame this up a little bit because I've got my own opinion about it. But when elk, elk in the flat tops, elk in these areas where they get hunted a lot, in my mind, they don't always fit what you see on TV shows and hunting in terms of the calling. So you got to kind of modify what you're doing. So one, I want to hear if you agree with that, and then regardless if you agree with it or not, I want to hear your overall archery strategy from finding them, calling them, and killing them. Is that
Okay.
fair?
Yeah, sure. So first on calling, my preference is that the best environment is if you hear them talk.
Sure.
And if I hear a bull, bugle in the morning, of course, if I'm say close enough where I can zip up within 100 yards and maybe set up and try to call them in, I'm going to do that. But the first thing I'll say is that let's say that bull is let's 500-600 yards away. I'm not going to answer right away. I'm not going to call to him. I don't want to call to him. I want to figure
Sure.
out how can I get close enough where then I can slip in and perhaps call him in, or maybe I don't even have to if I get in there.
Yeah.
So my first strategy is not to call.
Yeah.
If I don't hear anything, I tend to like to in the morning, in particular, just after first light, I like location bugles. I'm not screaming, but I'm just letting out. The location bugle basically says to the elk, "Hey, I'm over here. Where are you?" If I can get one to answer me, that's great. Um, a lot of times as I'm moving through the timber, I'll let off little soft cow calls. And with all of my calling in general, I'm not blurting it out there, at high volume. I like to start soft because that's typically the way you hear them call in the woods. You hear cows, you're sitting there. I mean, they're talking soft to one another. I mean, there's times that when they get excited, they crank it up, and then you would crank up the intensity. But in general, I'm trying to make the same noises that they make. You know, when I talk about bugling, I'm not doing where I do a growl, bugle, and then a chuckle or grunts at the end. You know, I might do that if I get an excited bull and I'm trying to challenge him and he's not coming. You know, I might try to do that to really irritate him to get him to come. But so in general, I'm calling to them the way that I hear them calling, and moving through the timber. I'm using soft cow calls to see if I can get one to answer me. And then once I get one to answer me, then I'm going to figure out what do I need to do to try to get close and slip in and get a shot.
Yeah, I gotcha. So two questions on that. Well, one thought is the way you describe it in the early morning, like if you hear them without calling. To me, the perfect analogy is turkey hunting, right? Like you find
Yes.
turkeys, and if you can find turkeys gobbling in the roost without getting them to shock gobble, they just behave better, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think it's because I think elk and turkeys know that if something stimulated them, they're kind of like, something's up,
Right.
So totally agree with that. On the bugles, do you only diaphragms? Is there a certain size of tube you use? Have you ever used the small tubes, the big tubes? Do you have any thoughts on that nitty gritty stuff?
Yeah. Certainly I do. I mean, I use diaphragms for bugling. Um, I do use a bunch of different, reed calls for cow calling. And what I will tell you is that some years the diaphragm works better for cow calls, and other years, you know, the bite and blow type calls or the new one from Phelps, the easy sucker,
Yeah.
that can work well. But with bugle tubes, I like one like this one here from Phelps. This is their new Unleashed tube. This is a really nice tube. It's lightweight, got a got a soft, neoprene like cover on it, so it's not noisy if you bounce it up a tree. But this is not too big to carry. This is kind of my go-to.
And
Um,
that has a removable mouthpiece on it.
it does have a removable mouthpiece, and there's another mouthpiece that comes with it for guys that can't use a diaphragm. And I played with that. It's really not hard to learn how to use that.
Oh,
And
did you have luck? Did you get it pretty quick?
yes, I did. Yeah, I
Yeah,
did.
I'll have to try it some more because I almost feel like I was hindered, Bob, because I'm so used to blowing a diaphragm.
Right.
You know,
Um,
it. Go ahead.
there's a video out there that Dirk put out when that
Okay.
first came out, that Dirk Durham put out, where he talks about how to blow into it. And I watched that, and I was making okay bugles with it right away. And I think back because you've been around this a long time, Cliff. I remember when we first started. You know, we had the old Primos tubes, and
Yeah, yeah.
and now like I can hear a Primos tube anywhere. I grew up on those things but I do know guys that can call in elk, and that's probably one thing we should just touch on real quick is that you don't have to be Corey Jacobson, you don't have to be Dirk Durham, you don't have to be a world champion elk caller to call in elk. All
No.
elk sound different, and I will tell you that some of the very worst bugles I've ever heard in the woods have been real elk, not hunters.
Sure.
Um,
Oh yeah.
no.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in the range of. I mean, not only the individual animal, but the range of sounds is. I mean, it's crazy. I mean,
Yes.
in recent time, Bob, I've been fooled by elk and been like, was that elk or was that birds? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because there's so many. The structure of their vocabulary is insanely. I don't want to call it complicated because I don't know if that is a very good description of it. There's a very much an individual component of it. They're like individuals, and it's really interesting what you said about the different calls, because I was this last year I was guiding down on a ranch, pretty big place, but high density of elk. Several guides had been working there for a long time, probably a decade, and I went out and had like a heyday with these elk the first couple days that I was guiding there. And one of the guides mentioned, he's like, it's so weird. They seem so responsive to your calls. And I wouldn't call, I'm none of the guys that you just mentioned in terms of my
Right.
ability. I'm not going to win any calling contests by any means. But at first I thought, I doubt it. But then I got to thinking, I'm like, you know what? It makes sense. You guys have been here. a lot of these cows they know you. You know, they kind of know you as a cow out there, as a
Right.
guy, and then a new guy shows up. He's got like a different pitch, a little bit different tonal structure. They're gonna be like, well, who is that? You know, it doesn't surprise me actually. You know,
Right.
and it is amazing. Some of these calls, like that easy sucker, that thing is easy. It's really easy for people to use, and I
Yeah.
feel like that's gonna be the it's like the hoochie mama of like the '90s, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, like the easy sucker is going to be, it's gonna kill a lot of elk on the way, but it is this you can hear one, when now
Right.
I can kind of I know the sound, but you can hand it to anybody. You hand it to a kid, and they'll be making a good sound quick. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing we probably should talk about with Colin is that that's changed over the years is that you know, these bulls nowadays in pressured areas like the flat tops, a couple things. A lot of times bulls with cows, they'll bugle at you all day long, but they're not coming. They just keep going. You keep moving in and you think you're getting close and they just keep taking their cows and moving away. So in some of those situations, if you know a bull has cows, I may use a few soft cow calls, but other than that, I'm trying to figure out what direction they're going and how I can cut them off.
Yeah.
I won't bugle at him because he's going to run away from me. The other thing I would say is that a lot of these bugles that will engage, and you think you got them coming, and then all of a sudden it goes silent. Don't give up on that because more times than not they come in silent in today's world. They don't come in screaming their bloody heads off like they used to. They just don't do that. They come in silent, and it's amazing how some of these animals, as big as they are, and you get a bigger bull with a big set of antlers, how they can come through that timber and you never hear anything, and
Yeah.
then they just kind of appear like ghosts.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if they bust you, you hear them leaving, big
Yeah,
time.
yes, you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But when
Yep,
they're coming in, it is amazing how quiet they can be.
yep.
What you mentioned the bulls of today. Have you noticed a big difference just in elk in general, Bob, over your years of hunting the flat tops? I mean, population dynamics, vocalizations, anything stick out to you?
Um, you know, let's be honest, we don't have the elk that we used to.
Yeah.
It's still really good hunting. I mean, when I started hunting in the flat tops, 30 years ago, and probably I'm going to say the first 8 years I guided, Cliff, it was,
Yeah.
archery. I'm not, I hesitate to say easy because there were times I didn't kill anything, or my
Sure.
clients didn't kill anything. But, it was, if you kept after it, you were going to get an opportunity. Let's say that for sure.
Yeah.
And, probably one big thing we haven't talked about, and this is another one for guys that are new, is that this is one area where I've seen a lot of guys blow opportunities is that elk hunting is tough. You can go and hunt 4 days, 5 days, all day long and not even see an animal or hear an animal.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're going along and out pops this elk, easy shooting range, and you're just emotionally and mentally let down. And by the time guys get their mental head together, you know, the elk is gone and there's a missed opportunity. So
Yep.
having that idea that every tree I go around, this bull is going to pop out. That's kind of the attitude you have to have when you're hunting these guys. And I've done it myself. I've blown some really easy opportunities because of that. So
Sure.
not letting off. But yeah, that's the biggest thing though with elk hunting over the years. It's gotten tougher. We got more pressure. I mean, that's one of the things now with over the counter licenses. We're going to be limited during archery. Um, and I think that's probably going to be a way of the future as, Colorado Parks and Wildlife figures out the finances, because of the crowds we're getting and the pressure on our elk herds and some of the other dynamics we have going on with losing country and stuff. Our elk herd is not, what it used to be. But, when I say that, I'm not trying to discourage anybody because it's still darn good hunting. I feel like when I go out there every year, if I work hard, and I really get after it and I maybe do a little bit of homework. And for me, because I've been hunting the same country for 30 years, I don't have to do the homework some people do.
Sure.
But if I get out there and I get after it every day, I feel like I'm going to get that opportunity to kill a bull. And there's still big bulls running around some of this country too. I mean, don't kid yourself. They're there. They just get in really ugly, hard to get
Oh
places.
yeah.
and they hang out and they are there. There's 300, 350 class bulls running around Colorado in a lot of these wilderness areas. You just need to be able to get into the country where they are and be patient and go find them.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's amazing. I mean, what I saw in the flat tops over the years was amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
I have a pair of sheds from a bull that I know he lived on public land during the hunting season. He's like 375-inch bull. You
Wow.
know,
Yep.
I mounted him on another cape of a bull. It took me years to kill a bull that was big enough to put the sheds on because the bases were so big, you know.
Wow.
Um, and as far as I know, Bob, nobody killed him ever, you know.
Wow.
Um,
Well, I had a young guy first rifle, or no, third rifle one year. I think this was in 2013. So it's a while ago, but not
sure.
that long ago. Opening day of third rifle, first bull elk he ever killed, and I coached him through it because he was he was ready to shoot before I wanted him to.
Yeah.
But to his credit, he paid and he listened to me. But the bull, he scored 354 on public
Yeah,
land.
big bull. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
big bull, and they're there, and I've seen other ones, still that they're there. It's just that they're in hard to get places until the snow drives them down.
Yeah, yeah. No, and that's just I mean, they live in a place where they get hunted a lot. And it's not the reality is, Bob, it's not like the surrounding private doesn't get hunted. It all gets
Right.
hunted. You
It
know what
all
I
gets,
mean? Those elk get hunted. I mean, basically, you know, with all the private land seasons and everything else, it's a big chunk of the year they're getting hunted, you know.
yeah,
So it's amazing that, you know, there are ones that run the gamut and get through it. But you know, just for people's expectation, Bob, because I think you hit on something that once people realize it, it helps them get through hunts so much better. Because you nailed it, man. And it might be a little bit different from your guiding, but my guiding in the flat tops, and this is going to go for a lot of the wilderness areas in Colorado. You know, easy to get tags. You know, a 5 day, 6 day guided hunt. You know, with a guide that knew the country pretty well. Rifle season, if you got one or two shooting opportunities, that was a good hunt, you
yes,
know. And that's hunting. That's not sleeping in half of the days. That's hunting all 5 days. You know,
yes,
is that kind of roughly where you were at?
absolutely, and that all ties back. If you're going to pay for a guided hunt, you really owe it to yourself to do some of the things we were talking about earlier about, you know, honing your physical fitness, honing your shooting skills, whether it's bow or rifle, and then really, some of that mental prep stuff. And, if you're going with an outfitter, they ought to be able to talk to those kinds of things to you about the kinds of things you should expect and set your expectations up front. And then it's up to you. You do your homework. I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, you know that's a good one, Bob, because you've been around the outfitting scene so much. Um, is there, you know, outside of, you know, maybe what you just said, is there any other tips that you think would help somebody avoid maybe frustration with a guide, frustration with booking an outfitted hunt, just from the data set you saw?
yeah, I mean, what I've seen is the first where it starts is, I mean, you need to do your homework on the outfitter, obviously, and you want to talk, you don't want to just read reviews online. Typically, what you like to do is get some references, um, and talk to those people if that's a possibility. I mean, the one thing that I've done with all the outfitters I've worked for, a lot of times they'll point clients to me and talk to me, and I'll spend an hour or whatever on the phone. If
Sure.
people aren't willing to do that with you, that's probably a red flag. You shouldn't go there. But it's really important to do your homework. And I would say the other thing is that number one is that you need to trust your guide. If
Yeah.
you don't trust your guide, you're going to break that relationship. And I'm telling you, I don't know any guides that I work with. They all want you to get an elk, and likely more so than you do, because
Sure.
a lot of guides may view that, hey, my gratuity is riding on that, and these guys don't make a lot of money. Where they make their money is on gratuity, and they
Yeah.
want to get you an elk. They
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to get you.
Yeah.
And
And plus, the reality too is, Bob, there's like a little internal social structure that guides live in. They don't want to be
right,
they don't, you know, they don't want to be the only guy that's that doesn't
No,
have a client with an elk, you know?
absolutely, absolutely. They want to get you that elk. So trust them. Do what they tell you to do. I've seen opportunities. Probably one of the biggest ones I've seen where guys can mess up is in an archery hunt. Let's say I'm guiding two guys and I got a bull interested in coming. I get them set up and I'm gonna get in the middle of them. I got them out on what I call the points because these elk like to kind of circle around. Um, and I'll get back and I'll tell them, do not get up until I come get you.
Yeah.
And I've had guys over the years, and I'm working this bull, and he's screaming his head off, and I know he's coming. And all of a sudden, they just shut up, and I go and get my hunter, and maybe the first guy I go and get, he's still there, and I go and get the second guy, he's not there. Well, I know what happened. The bull
Yeah.
saw him, and he boogied. He shut up and he boogied.
Yeah.
So that's a missed opportunity. And as a guide, I'm feeling like I did my job, but you didn't listen to me. You didn't trust me. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a hard. I mean, I totally agree with you. It's hard, and what's I think you get into there's it's such an interesting social dynamic, Bob, because I think there's a lot of cases where the client as a hunter has more experience than the guide, more just generic hunting experience than the guide. But even if the guide is a 20-year-old guy, let's say it's his first season hunting out of that camp, guiding out of that camp, even if let's just assume you've got more knowledge than the guy, his local knowledge and what he's experienced in the last 45 days and what he's pulled out of the conversations with the other guides, it's worth more than your experience. It just is,
Oh,
you know.
you know, and I'll give you an example that I mean, when you're working in an operation, it's not just the guy that you have, or I should say, as a client, when you're working with a young guy in an operation, for example, or somebody that's inexperienced,
Yeah,
it's not just that guide that you're working with. You should have the whole operation behind you. And what I
sure.
mean by that is that, for example, when I worked at Winterhawk, I mean, I leaned on Larry a lot, and I hunted that country for 14 years, and I felt like when I walked in the door, there was only one guy, his son-in-law, that maybe knew the country as good as I did. But
Sure.
Larry knew places that I didn't know, and he would point me to those places.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
would go and I would kill elk, and the young people, we would spend time with them before the season. Or if guys weren't, let's say that I had, one of the guides that was working under me, if he wasn't running into anything, I'd sit down with him that night and I'd go over a topo map. Nowadays it would be on X, and I
Sure.
go over and say, well, you need to go try over here, and if you don't run it, I'll go here. So you should have the whole operation behind you. It's not just that young kid, but it's the reputation of the whole operation.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I mean, you touched on something within that. Totally agree with you on that, Bob. But it sparked something that I have found to this day amazes me about elk in particular. When I was running my outfit, when I bought it, one of the old owners, like several owners before me, it was Cade. I don't know if you ever met Cade, but he brought me a book. He brought me a history of the outfit. You know, they had actually like documented, all the names of the mules and horses and all the crew and all that stuff, some cool stories and everything. And in there was a bunch of black and white pictures. And he gave me this book. I'd probably been outfitted in there for 8 years or so, so I had like a pretty good catalog of where I'd been packing elk out. And I swear to you, 70% of those black and white pictures with a guy standing next to a dead bull elk, they'd take them when they go in, when they went in and packed a bull out, they'd take a picture with the guy. I knew the spot. And those elk, I mean, 40 years before, I was packing elk out of the same exact spot.
I believe it.
It's really interesting, and I tell people that all the time, man. If if your neighbor who's 85 years old tells you about a hunting spot, don't discount it. Even if he
Right.
hasn't been there for 40 years, the how animals move through the country is really stunning to me, man.
Yep. And probably another tip I would give to guys, and this goes for guys do it yourself elk hunts, or even let's say you're going with an outfitter in a drop camp, and you got an outfitter you like, you've learned how to hunt elk, and you're going to use his drop camp as it makes things easier to get things in and out.
Sure.
But one of the things that I did over the years, even before I started guiding, was I kept a diary of where I ran into animals.
Yeah,
And, over the years, I can't tell you how many times where I'm having a really tough week and I'm not hearing nothing, I'm not seeing nothing. And I pull that diary out and I start looking, and it would just give me a couple new ideas about where I would go and try. And a lot of times it paid dividends where we'd kill elk.
sure. Yeah, yeah, no, I mean they go back to the same spots a lot, and maybe a different time of the year. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep.
It's
Absolutely.
it's
Yep.
it's interesting, you know. Um, no, all that stuff is wild. Well, let me. I got a couple questions for you. I don't mean to pivot too much, but these are ones
Sure.
that folks love. I want to hear most overrated gear and most underrated gear. However you want to answer it, Bob. You got thoughts on
Okay.
that?
Yeah, I do. I'm just pulling out some of my
Got
thoughts
some
here.
gear notes?
Yeah. So, I'm going to say that I'm not going to call out specific brands, but I'm going to talk about gear in general.
Yeah, sure.
So, what I see probably the biggest thing, I think the new rage is that guys think, some guys think they need to have the latest and greatest rifles, and bows, and these things can cost a lot of money, particularly archery equipment.
Oh yeah, sure. Couple
And
$1,000 easy.
oh yeah, and you know as well as I do, Cliff, since about what 2010, 2012, archery crossbows or compound bows back in that time, they were pretty darn good. I mean, you shoot out to
Yeah.
50, 60 yards with those, no problem. So, and same thing goes for rifles. There's a lot of really good rifles out there. You don't need to buy this high end thing that's, all custom and everything else. I mean, hey, if you got the money and that's how you want to spend it, I'm not telling you not to do it, but there's some really, really good rifles out there that you can buy that are medium priced that your average working guy can afford. And that leads into the next thing is the optics that go on them, or the ones that you're carrying on your chest. You don't need to go and buy, the binoculars that are $2,000. In fact, I'm going to tell you that I don't own them because I worry about if I lost them on my mules, riding my mules, or lost them in the woods. I'm not saying they're not nice, but there's again some medium price glass, including scopes, that are more affordable, have really good warranties. So that's an opportunity for guys that don't
What?
have the budget to
Yeah,
not
no,
spend it.
that's a good one, Bob, because I think that not that's not gonna like some people would agree, some people would disagree, but I want to
Right.
know, do you have the exact brands? Tell me who the exact brands are that you've trusted in
I'm going to
the.
tell you, even though I will say, Leopold obviously has had a reputation for years, and I do have some rifles that I have Leopold. But
Yep.
right now, on my go-to shooting rifle, I've got a Tikka T3X stainless,
Yeah.
7 millimeter mag. Not, I think I paid $700 for the thing.
It's a
Um,
good gun. I have the same. I
oh,
mean, yeah, good gun.
the only customization I did to it, Cliff, out of the box was I got reading about, it comes with a plastic trigger guard. And I
Yeah.
got reading in American Rifleman about a manufacturer down in New Mexico that makes an aluminum one.
Okay.
And the guy in this article claimed that it would cut the accuracy in some cases in half. And
Yeah.
I put that in there, and honest to God, shooting Hornady bullets at 200 yards, I can shoot 3-shot groups all day long that I can cover with a nickel with that thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I figure for elk season, what else do you need?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, that's like it's phenomenal gun out of the box. The so you're not talking about the bolt shroud. You're talking about the trigger, the actual like the
That surrounds the trigger. Yeah, it's
yeah, yeah,
plastic.
yeah. You
Yeah,
know,
and
I
it's
yeah, I think I have one of those, man. And it's very interesting you said that. A guy sent me one, and I have not put it in my rifle yet, Bob.
yeah,
I think
put it in.
the guy's name was it's in New Mexico, like High Desert Rifle Works
Yes,
or
that's
something. Yeah,
that's the
same guy.
place.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
That's the guy. Yep.
And so you've tested it, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to have you repeat yourself, but you actually saw results with the difference.
I read about it and then I put it in mine, and I couldn't believe the way it shot.
Yeah, yeah,
Now
for sure.
maybe it would have shot close to that with a plastic one. I got to tell you, but the cost of these things is trivial.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, I mean, when I bought mine, it was maybe 65 or $70,
sure.
and I figured for that it's piece of cake. And then as far as scopes go and optics, even though they're not made here in the U.S., but their customer service is outstanding, is Vortex.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, the Vortex, even if you go out and buy the middle grade, the Viper, I mean, that's some pretty. I mean, my scopes are the Vortex Viper. I like a 2.5 to 10 power because again, I'm still hunting a lot, and I feel like on 2.5 power, I learned to to snap shoot, offhand pretty
Sure.
quick, shooting whitetails in that 2.5 power. When I'm on the move, I've got it on 2.5 power, and if I need to, typically I'm not shooting. The furthest elk I've shot is maybe 430 yards with the rifle, and 10 power is plenty for that. I don't need
Yep.
that big, heavy, bulky scope, and that, as you know, that doesn't ride well on a horse or mule anyway.
Yeah.
But Vortex, I've had really good luck with them. On the optics, I do have the Razor HDs. I have the 12 by 50s, super compact, really super clear. I've had guys that have, the higher end $2,000 glass, and they say, "Wow, if I would have saw these, I probably wouldn't have paid
Sure.
double for my binos." So, but those are ones that have been good to me. And the few problems I've had with Vortex, in fact, one time I had the rubber cups, the eye guards, during the break between second and third rifle. I had to send them back to get new eye covers put on. They sent me an overnight shipping label, and I sent them overnight mail. 2 days later, I had them back in the mail with the new eye guards, and it was
Yeah.
free. So their customer service is top notch.
Yeah, no, and I agree, Bob. Like I don't use any of their stuff right now, but over the years I have used a fair amount of Vortex stuff, and dude, I mean, I broke a rangefinder and I broke a spotting scope. 1,000% my fault, and they replaced it, like
Yep,
without question. So pretty phenomenal, like you say, like they're quick about it, all of that. I don't have any complaints with them
yep.
either. It's I'm really glad that you were willing to share the actual brands, Bob, because I admittedly, man, I have Swirl binoculars, like I have high end optics, but I'm with you. I don't know, well, I do know that somebody to get into elk hunting, even if they're pretty experienced, they don't need to have $10,000 worth of optics. Like
No,
for sure,
heck
they
no.
don't. But I admittedly don't have a whole lot of experience with all those brands in the middle. Maven, Vortex. I have some Leupold scopes on a couple of my rifles, but the like Vortex. All the clients I've had that use it, they're happy with it. I had a Razor spotting scope at one point. That's the one I broke, and it's good.
Right.
It's good
Yeah.
stuff. And in the end, it's the marketing of not just optics but everything is so geared towards this idea that there's just this little incremental improvement. You know what I mean? It's
Oh,
like,
it is. And probably the other one we didn't talk about in terms of overrating. And some people would call me a hypocrite because I wear a lot of the high end clothing,
sure.
because of the amount of days I spend in the field and getting older. Weight and warmth is a factor. But you don't have to have the latest and greatest QU Sitka gear or First Light gear to go hunt elk. You can have your merino base layers that you use to ski with, or
Oh yeah.
to hike with, or snowshoe, or whatever. And the main thing is just having some good layers. Light and weight is a good thing. you know but you don't have to have super high end clothing to hunt elk, and that's an area where you can spend an awful lot of money in a hurry. So that would be probably my top three, where guys can look to save as they get into this and not have to spend thousands of dollars to get themselves set up.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, for sure, man. Totally. Um, the other one along the lines on that, and these are kind of the ones I ask all of the experienced guides on here. So I think you probably touched on this already, Bob, but I'll let you answer it again. If you could look at all the hunters that you've observed on public land that are elk hunting, I'm talking the do-it-yourself backpackers you ran into, the drop camp guys you've packed in, the clients that you've hunted with, even fellow guides that you've been around. Can you think of any, and they could be anything, could be personality traits, could be what, it doesn't matter, things that just set them apart, the successful guys from the unsuccessful guys, the consistently successful and unsuccessful?
I'm going to say that they don't give up. They keep a
Yeah,
positive
okay.
attitude when they're out in the field. And then
Yep.
the other thing is, another big thing that I'll encourage guys is that there's a lot of guys out there. Well, I'm going to unit this year because I read that this unit is good. And I'm going to tell you that pick a unit and stay with it for three
Yeah.
to 5 years and really learn it, because there's so much to learn about, where the elk hang when they're pressured. And then another one that guys underestimate. I mean, Onyx is really good for figuring out maybe where you want to go and how you might want to get out. But the part where boots on the ground still trumps it is figuring out the easy way in and easy way out,
Sure.
without getting seen, without getting smelled to where those animals are hanging. And the only way you do that is through experience. You can guess an onyx, but it's still not the same as being there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm totally with you, Bob. And I'm a huge fan of Onyx. I use it all the time. They're a supporter of mine, so I have a lot of positive things to say about them. But I do feel, and it's got to be the nature of a lot of hunters' lives. They're working in an office. They live in an urban environment. One thing they can do is e-scout. So sometimes I think that gets into a misperception that effort e-scouting is always equivalent to gains, right? And there's kind
Right.
of a point where you don't need to e-scout anymore. You need to go hunt the spot. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
I,
And
I would agree. And what I would say too is if you're going to e-scout, um, you need to try to find somebody that is good at it. Like the guy that one of the guys I've hunted and guided with over the years. I'm actually going up there to do some work on the ranch he works at outside of Cody this summer. Guide some horseback and fly fishing. He's one of the best that I've seen. That he can look at him. He can look at a map,
oh
and
yeah,
and some people would say he's lucky, but I'm going to tell you that it's not luck because I've seen him do it. Where and I'm more of a learn by doing kind of guy, but he can look at that map. Man, he
kind of
gets in
knows
all
I
the time in places where he's never been before. So there are guys that are really good at it. And of course, you're looking for the basic stuff, where they got shelter, north facing, steep timbered areas with benches and where you got water and food close by. And we all know the variables, or those of us that have been around elk,
sure.
where the areas they like to hang. But he just seems to have a knack for it that's above and beyond your normal guy.
Yeah, yeah, sure. He's
So,
just good at identifying the spots. It,
right.
it's uh it is it's very interesting. I find that it is just my anecdotal thought on it, Bob. I find Colorado, like let's take where me and you have spent a lot of time in the flat tops. So hard to e-scout because you can go on cover, water, and feed, and it's like, okay, this whole square's the map. We can exclude the X. They're not on the X, right? But they could be anywhere else in the
Oh
in
yeah.
yeah. I mean, because everywhere else qualifies on all three of those metrics. Where there's other places, like the river systems in Idaho and those sort of things. There's country that elk will not live in. Doesn't have what they
Okay.
need. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so it's interesting because I feel like some places it's easier, some places it's harder. But it's the one thing you pointed out, man, is key, and that's that people jump around these units, and it's mind-boggling to me. I mean, me and you know some of the, several of these flat tops units, and you could go. I mean, a guy could go spend 8 days in an area, and he comes out and he's like, "There's no elk there." I'm gonna go now. I'm gonna go to the San Juans, and it's like, well, yeah, dude. Like, of course, there's never elk there. There's never elk where you
Yeah.
go. There's like
Right.
I haven't packed that a bull out of there in the last decade. But if you would have went 3 miles this way, you would have been in the thick of it. You know what I mean? And you would have
Right.
still been in the same unit. You would have
Yep.
parked your truck in the same spot. You know,
Absolutely.
it's I find it's such a weird psychological. Not I should say weird. It's probably it probably seems rational to people. No luck in northeast Colorado. I'll go to southwest.
Right. Yeah. And probably one thing we did trigger a thought when you talked about the flat tops, and there's so many areas that just look like holds elk, and
Sure.
that's true. And that's where it can be quite challenging. One of the toughest parts, and this probably holds for any area, right, is finding the animals. So the one thing I would tell guys is that, particularly for archery hunters, that once you find the animals, pick your opportunity to slip in wisely, because that can be the hardest part of your hunt. Is if you are reckless with the wind, or you're going to get seen, or the setup is just not right, it's getting dark. um, and you got more days in your hunt, you know, pick your opportunity wisely, because once you blow them out, you're starting from ground zero again.
Yeah.
You can waste days. I'll take more risk on the last day, obviously, but
Sure.
in the first day or two, my risk tolerance is a lot lower. I'm going
Yeah.
to be really careful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way. And it goes back to the expectation thing. We talked about rifle, but kind of the same deal with archery, right? Like
Right.
if I'm guiding an archer in the flat tops, if we get into vocalizations 2 out of 5 days, 2 out of 6 days, pretty
That's pretty good.
pretty
Yep.
good, you know.
Yep.
That's so if if you but it's a little bit different archery because if you find them the second day, you can have vocalizations the whole time if you don't screw it
Yes.
up, you know.
Yes. That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So for sure, man. I totally I have the same thought process on that. Um I was gonna ask you. Well, this is actually a question from Travis in my group, and it's actually kind of interesting. He said, "Have you ever heard of guys driving deer and elk?" And in modern times, and do you have any feelings about that? On these type of hunts, Bob?
Man, I've seen guys try to do it, and I can't say they haven't killed one, but that's not going to be my strategy. There's so
Yeah,
much country, and there's so many escape routes. Probably the only thing you'll succeed in doing is kicking the animals up and pushing them, and somebody else is going to shoot them over there in the
yeah,
next valley. It's pretty
yeah,
tough to put drives on. We don't have the barriers that for example, some of these guys in the middle and northeast parts of the country that put drives on hunting whitetails. It's just a different animal.
yeah, yeah. And I think that even certain mountain ranges it works better.
Right.
Like you say, the flat tops,
Yeah.
a big basin in the flat tops, elk can go out anywhere. You
Yep.
know, in a lot of them. And then you go into collegiates, you got big rigid bowls where they got to get out one way. Maybe it's a little bit better. My thought the biggest thing on that, Bob, is because my dad used to drive elk a lot, and a lot of the old time outfitters did and stuff. Is it takes a huge coordinated effort. Not
Yes, it
something.
does.
It's
Yeah.
not something that like me and you were gonna go do, right?
No.
Like you gotta have. And
Now,
so, go ahead.
what can work is if you got a buddy and that you hunt with, and let's say you're going to work a high mountain bowl where you kind of move through there together, where you might move stuff up or down the hill.
Oh,
That
sure.
sometimes that can work, but that's different than driving.
Yeah. Can
Or
you
maybe
can you can you
we were
explain
coming
what
in
your
from different angles or something.
Yeah, can you explain that? So like me and you were hunting, Bob. We glassed up some elk in the aspens. They're feeding, maybe moving along a little bit. Explain that strategy.
Yeah. So the strategy might be where it could be where one guy, and the wind is obviously going to play a key part in this, and
Sure.
also, the terrain and being able to. But a couple schools of thought is that depending on the terrain, maybe one guy might be able to get on a level with the elk, and the other guy could get down below. If it looked like the country that the guy up high did spook them, that they're gonna head down the hill, or vice versa,
Sure.
that kind of thing. Another thing that can happen if the wind and circumstances are right is perhaps one guy can slip around to the other side of them, try to get in an area where we can cut them off, and the other guy can still hunt through. I mean, those would be things, but really, the terrain and the wind would dictate how I would do that.
Yeah, dictate if it's gonna work or not. No, I think it's a
Right.
good approach, man. Good deal. Well, Bob, we have. I think we've left people a ton to talk, or left people with a bunch of stuff to think about, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's tough hunting, and every little bit helps, man. Do you have anything else you want people to know, or strategy
Probably
takeaways
the
from
only other
folks?
thing is we talked about gear that's underrated.
Oh yeah, I'm
This
sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
this is an area where I think if you where I tell people to invest their money is that the first one is good boots. Don't
Yeah,
buy cheap boots. I mean, you need a boot that fits your foot. It's fairly light and weight, good traction, good support. Typically not too heavy, waterproof. You know, buy a good pair of boots. I've seen guys slip and fall in poor boots. I've seen them get blisters because they buy. That's one thing. There's, in my opinion, anyway. Maybe some big guys that can flex these stiffer boots would feel differently, but for most of us out there, to buy these really stiff boots we used to hunt in, um, there's no reason to. The boot technology has evolved so much that you get a lot more comfort and a lot less risk for blisters if you have a
Yeah.
boot that flexes a little bit easier. So boots, quality rain gear, you're going to get variable weather in Colorado. It starts off blue sky during the archery season. Afternoons, it's typical for afternoon thunderstorms, sometimes, hail and high winds, and it can get cold and wet in a hurry. So having some really good waterproof, lightweight, packable rain gear is definitely worth the investment, and it will hold up. And probably the last piece is your backpack. I mean, having a backpack that fits you well, that you can carry your gear all day long, really important. Or you're going to get shoulder fatigue or whatever, neck fatigue if the pack doesn't fit you right. A lot of these new packs out there now, you can slip a quarter, loosen the bag, and slide a quarter behind and take a load of meat out, so you're not like the old days. Cliff, we used to go back to camp and go get a freighter frame, and
Yeah.
go pack
Sure.
quarters out that way. Not doing that anymore. That's wasted miles.
Yeah.
Um,
Bob, what pack do you like?
there's several out there. I mean, obviously, probably, and I've never owned one, but I know a lot of guys love what's on your hat there, the Kafaru. I mean, I've never heard a bad thing about
Yeah,
that
yeah,
pack.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, the other ones that I would say, currently I'm running a QU pack because it's just
Sure.
what I got. I got a couple different size bags from it. It fits me well. Um, I've also used EXO, and I'm really high on those packs. They're made,
Guys, people like them.
yeah, they're awesome. And then a new company, Cliff, out of Montana, that actually has some really cool gear. They're not cheap either, but all these manufacturers I'm talking about, if you invest the money, they stand behind their products, is Stone Glacier.
Sure.
Stone Glacier makes some really good products. And probably on that note, for any one of these manufacturers, they're coming out with new stuff every year. So guess what? There's gear freaks like me that a lot of times got to have the latest and greatest. And, a lot of guys are unloading, previous level or versions of these packs on eBay, and there is nothing wrong with these packs picking one up used on eBay or
Yeah.
Facebook Marketplace, because they're built to last a lifetime if you take care of them, and the product manufacturers stand behind them. So
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, you see they retain their value fairly well. I
yes,
mean,
absolutely,
you're not going to get 95% of what you paid for, but it's not unheard of to get, 2-3 years later to get 60%, 70% of
right,
the, what it
yep,
cost you. So
yep,
no, I'm with you. And all those brands, my brother's got a Stone Glacier, loves it. I know a bunch of guys that have Exo packs, love it. I like Kafaru. They've always been awesome I've used their packs forever. But I always ask guys because I am pretty entrenched in the packs that I like. You know what I mean, Bob? And it's weird.
yep,
It's not something that admittedly I'm willing to try that much different stuff. And ironically I feel the same way about boots. The problem is
yeah,
for me to try new packs and new boots, it's really costly because
yes,
if they suck, and it could be they suck in the sense that they just don't fit me as an individual, right?
right,
The the
absolutely,
the pack doesn't fit my torso, the boot doesn't fit the width of my foot, whatever. It's nothing like specific brands. It's just I don't want to like to your point, if it's wrong, it screws up a hunt. So I find that they're not things I test. I don't
no.
have, you know.
In fact, there's a guy. He was a former client of mine. I'm 6'3", and this guy's probably 6'6", and he's getting into hunting elk on his own now. And he went out and he bought a pack. And I wish he'd talked to me before he did, because I would have definitely steered him towards, EXO number one, or Cafaro, even Stone Glacier, even QU. Their frames they have frames for tall guys that are expandable.
Sure.
And I'm not knocking the brand, because a lot of guys love this pack, and some guys may be upset. But he bought a mystery ranch, and he
Yeah.
can't wear the thing; it's killing him. And
Won't
it's
fit
because
him.
I
Yeah.
know it's because it doesn't fit him right. When he describes his problems, he's getting a lot of shoulder and neck fatigue, and that tells me that he's carrying all the weight there versus on his hips. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah. Yeah. And those packs, Mystery Ranch, I mean, They make good packs too. I
Yeah,
one
they do.
one thing I'll say, Bob, and this is just going to be my bias coming out. One piece of equipment in the hunting world that you can buy American made is packs. So why,
Yes.
in my view, why would you not?
Right.
And the reason I say it is like Mystery Ranch is not the only one. There's several other
Right.
ones, and I think Mystery Ranch makes some domestically, some foreign, and I have nothing against them. But for me personally, there's good options, and that's not the case on a lot of the hunting gear. I
Agreed.
own lots of hunting gear that's made in Asia, but if I can, I try to buy it in the U.S. So
Yep.
just my
Me
thought on
too.
it. Um,
Yep.
but yeah, absolutely. And one thing I wanted to ask you, and I thought about earlier, and I should have took a note, but it popped in my mind before I let you go, man. Right now it is July 27th. Guys got 2 months basically, right? Well, not 2 months. They got a month and 10 days, let's say, if they're going archery elk hunting. On the physical preparation front, is there anything they can do?
Yeah, I'd say get out there with a backpack on and do some hiking.
Yeah,
You know,
just
um,
realistic. Put some weight in a backpack and
realistic, but don't. The big thing is don't. Particularly guys, if you've been away from exercise for a while, don't go out there and try to kill it, because
yeah.
all you're going to do is get yourself sore or get yourself hurt and discouraged.
And
Start easy.
you don't really have the time to make like
Right. You
yeah,
don't have the time to make massive changes, but certainly you can get out there, put a pack on, and do some hiking, put some miles on. If you've got some new boots, that's a great time to go put them
yep,
on and break them into your feet. You can clean up your diet a little bit. Maybe you want to drop a few pounds, maybe drink a few less beers or drink some lower calorie beer. That's kind of one of my pet
yeah,
peeves. I got some guys that like to drink those high calorie IPAs, and I said, man, that's like
yeah,
400 calories in one beer. Not doing it. But
sure,
do what works for you, but try to drop a few unwanted pounds and get out there and put some miles on with a pack on.
yeah. I totally agree. And like you said, boots and pack. Yeah, even if it's yeah, sure, it's a little physical preparation, but I notice it for me, Bob. Like if I don't wear my pack for 6 months and I throw it on for a hunt, I get bad rhomboid pain, like
Right.
unbearable rhomboid pain. But if I wear it with some weight for like 2 or 3 days, it goes away.
Yeah. And
You know?
I kind of build up over the summer. In the beginning, I was
Yeah,
doing some short hikes, but did a really long one the other day fishing with my son, and my pack probably weighed going in about 20 pounds and we did 10 miles up, pretty steep country up to 11.2 fishing. And next week I'm going, at the end of next week, I'm going backpacking, where on the way in, my pack will probably weigh 50, 55 pounds,
yeah,
lighter coming out when the food's gone. But, so I kind of like to try to start easy and build up. Don't, the idea is you want to hit elk season where you're just starting to hit your peak, you know. You don't need to peak prior. You want to peak during the season so you go out there and have a good time and don't wear
sure.
yourself out.
Yep. But yeah, no, and then at the same time, at this point, you can still it's not you know what the problem is, Bob, is a lot of guys are like, it's 40 days out. Screw it, man. I'm just not going to do any prep. It's like some is still better. Some is
Yeah,
still better.
same thing with shooting. Get out there and shoot
Yeah.
now. Shoot with all your gear on. Go out there on the target. If you're archery hunting, even rifle, and you're shooting real shooting positions. I like to play the mental game with myself. Am I going to put this arrow or bullet in the vitals or not? First shot, not the
Yeah,
second
sure.
or third. Once I'm warmed up and everything
Yeah.
else, and I'm used to the trigger pull and the recoil, or I'm relaxing. When I let the arrow go. I mean, first time, because that's what it's going to be when the real deal comes along this fall.
Yeah, no for sure. Well, thanks a lot, Bob. Where can people follow you, man?
I am out there on Facebook. Folks can feel free to send me a friend request, and I'm also on Instagram, um, Bob T 756. Certainly feel free to follow me if you got questions. If I can ever help you with, I'm one of those guys that I'm reaching the point in my life where I realize my days in the Elkwoods are numbered, but I'm far from giving up, and I do enjoy passing it on and sharing my experiences, because we got to stick together on this stuff and help one another, particularly in today's world where we got folks trying to take our hunting rights away from us. So,
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Thanks, Bob. I appreciate it, man.
yeah, no problem, Cliff. Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Thanks. If you enjoyed this content, do me a huge favor. Subscribe on whatever platform you consume it on. Spotify, Apple, YouTube, whatever works for you guys. Everything else is on my website, pursuitwithcliff.com. Go there and it's going to be very apparent to you that I work my ass off just to not have a real job. All the hunts I guide, all the seminars I put on, all the unique experiences I offer, and the membership site, all the details are there.